I need you all in or full out. Don't leave me halfway across the world.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Garden Variety Ethics. Today I'm going to talk about 3 classes of reasons that help motivate the adoption of veganism: ethical, environmental, and health. Now I say help motivate because 2 of the classes, health and environmental, are not sufficient by themselves as reason to go fully vegan. As I discussed in the last episode, veganism is a way of living that seeks to exclude exploitation and suffering of sentient beings. So it is natural that in some situations, the healthiest thing to do, or the most environmentally friendly thing to do, won't necessarily be the most ethical thing to do. Thankfully, I think, and by far a majority of cases, this won't be true, and the ethical thing to do will also be the healthiest or most environmental thing to do. I also say classes of reasons because there are many reasons within a certain class that might motivate the adoption of veganism. For instance, I might be motivated to go vegan because I find that processed meat is classified as a Class 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. That won't be the only reason I go vegan, but likely some combination of relevant health reasons might persuade me to adopt a plant-based diet. I guess what I'm really trying to say is that there isn't one monolithic reason, the health reason, which is going to persuade me to eat plant-based. Any number of different reasons might convince me within the class of health. Another quick word on the classes. These are not the only classes of reasons one might go vegan. These are at least the classes of reasons that are popular and that I take to be good and convincing. You might decide, for instance, to go vegan because you want to show people around you that you care about being moral. A class that this reason might fall under, say, social perception or something like that, seems disingenuous to me and not really one I care to discuss. Ethical reasons are the primary motivation for the adoption of veganism as a way of life. Practicing veganism naturally arises from the recognition of animals as beings that deserve moral consideration. The extent to which they deserve moral consideration might change depending on your view, but for most vegans, animals deserve a level of moral consideration that renders almost all of our current uses of and interactions with them impermissible or not allowable. So what grounds this level of moral consideration? How do vegans justify their ethical claims? Usually this is done by highlighting certain ways in which humans and non-human animals are alike. For instance, like I've talked about in my other videos, Peter Singer argues that in virtue of their sentience, or ability to perceive and experience the world, animals have interests which include avoiding pain, pursuing pleasure, survival, reproduction, just like us. Like I mentioned last episode, he takes the principle of equality seriously, which means that we ought to treat equal the like interests of all sentient beings, be they human or otherwise. The phrase like interests gets to the fact that not all humans have the same interests. For example, dogs have little interest in voting, unlike humans, who have no interest in voting. Maybe a better example is watching television. The principle of equal consideration doesn't need to accommodate for the interests of one species that doesn't have a relevant counterpart in another species, like watching TV. Interests that both species share, like the pursuit of pleasure and avoidance of pain, are like interests, and therefore ought to be considered equally. Singer states that just like we wouldn't think it moral to consider the interests of men more than the interests of women, it would be wrong to consider the interests of humans more than the interests of non-human animals. If the principle of equality is accepted, the burden lies on those using animals to justify their treatment of sentient beings, rather than a vegan needing to justify the opposite. What morally relevant difference exists between humans and non-humans that justifies this treatment? Many people rely on intelligence as a means to justify their treatment of non-human animals. The thinking goes, since non-human animals are less intelligent than human animals, they don't deserve the same moral treatment. But this presupposes the claim that intelligence is morally relevant. It doesn't answer the question of why intelligence constitutes a moral difference. Some people say that a higher intelligence makes certain animals more sensitive to pain, since they can endure the physical pain inflicted upon them, and can comprehend their situation, which would cause them additional mental pain. But it doesn't follow from that animals that cannot comprehend their situation won't also endure some mental pain. In some situations, it seems like comprehending might make things better, and in other cases worse. Animals that don't know what is going on might be afraid unnecessarily, or they might not be afraid when they should be. Simply being less intelligent doesn't explain why we can treat them any differently. Does this mean we should have less harsh criminal sentences for geniuses rather than the average person? According to a view that stratifies moral worth through intelligence, the more intelligent a being, human or otherwise, is the better we ought to treat them. And this leads to my second point, which is that even if intelligence were a reason to treat sentient beings morally differently, currently we're doing a really poor job of following through on this hierarchy. For example, many primates such as chimpanzees, whose intelligence level is not far from our own, are used in scientific experiments. Here's an example of one such experiment performed under Harlow at the Primate Research Center in Madison, Wisconsin, in which they studied the effects of social isolation on monkeys by, quote, allowing baby monkeys to attach to cloth surrogate mothers who could become monsters, end quote. This is from their journal. The first of these monsters was a cloth monkey mother who, upon schedule or demand, would eject high-pressure compressed air. It would blow the animal's skin practically off its body. What did the baby monkey do? It simply clung tight and tighter to the mother, because a frightened infant clungs to its mother at all costs. We did not achieve any psychopathology. However, we did not give up. We built another surrogate monster mother that would rock so violently that the baby's head and teeth would rattle. All the baby did was cling tighter and tighter to the surrogate. The third monster we built had an embedded wireframe within its body which would spring forward and eject the infant from its ventral surface, ventral being stomach. The infant would subsequently pick itself off the floor, wait for the frame to return into the cloth body, and then cling again to the surrogate. Finally, we built our porcupine mother. On command, this mother would eject sharp brass spikes all over the ventral surface of its body. Although the infants were distressed by these pointed rebuffs, they simply waited until the spikes receded and then returned to cling to the mother. This experiment is not an isolated incident of unusually cruel scientists. Painful procedures like this are standard practice for millions of animals that are used for scientific experiments around the world. And if intelligence matters, our use of chimpanzees, many of which possess intelligences that surpass that of human infants, would be morally impermissible. Similarly, we treat inconsistently other groups of species with similar intelligence levels. For example, according to the Animal Welfare Act, pets like dogs and cats have legal protection against abuse, and yet farm animals, like pigs, who are similarly as intelligent, have no such protection. They are abused and killed for our pleasure. But can you imagine grabbing a live dog, slitting its throat, and throwing it into a boiling pot of water? If intelligence were grounding the difference with which we treated different groups of animals, we would be committing a terrible crime if it were a dog or a pig. The ethical argument for veganism can essentially be boiled down to this. If we can easily choose not to inflict unnecessary harm on sentient beings, why wouldn't we? Leo Tolstoy sums it up nicely, saying, "A man can live and be healthy without killing animals for food. Therefore, if he eats meat, he participates in taking animal life merely for the sake of his appetite, and to act so is immoral." Of course, practicing veganism includes much more than simply abstaining from meat. But his point can be made across all domains in which we use animals. We have workable, and sometimes more affordable, healthy, and sustainable substitutes for nearly every use of animals today, from fake leather, fur, wool, silk, and down, nut-based milks, cheeses, yogurts, maple syrups, and agave nectars, and seitan, tempeh, or tofu-based fake meats. And that's not even mentioning the fact that we could do just fine with non-artificial, plant-based versions of these products, like cotton for clothing, or basically any other fruit, vegetable, nut, seed, legume, or fungi for food. In addition, many things that are plant-based have animal products unnecessarily added to them for the sake of convenience, or because killing animals for appetite results in a lot of byproducts we don't want to eat, like tendon, bone, or skin, which are turned into things like gelatin. These are then added to things like beer and wine, cosmetics, medication and supplements, candles, pet foods, condoms, the list goes on. Going back to Tolstoy, his jump from eating animals solely for appetite and it being immoral can't be made without some further argumentation. But if we value animals morally, even in the slightest, then the vast majority of our treatment of them is immoral. And as I've argued today, we have good reason to value them far more than that. Anyway, that's all that I have for now. Let me know in the comments section if you see any faults in the argumentation I provided, or think you have a good reason that justifies our current use of animals. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. If you're looking for more information, or are curious about the topic, I'd highly recommend watching the free documentary Earthlings. I'll provide a link for it in the description below. Next time should be a bit of a change in pace, as I'll go over the health reasons to adopt a vegan diet. I might even refrain from talking about Peter Singer. See you then.